Brick structures. You have old ones and new ones. They come in all kind of shapes and sizes, everything from a house to a church to a building. Sometimes brick's left its natural color, other times it's painted. And many of us have brick structures on our layout. Now, I know sometimes, especially when trying to get the look of an older brick building, it can be a little bit of a challenge and sometimes a little bit intimidating. So what I'm going to do is take you through my approach on how to paint and weather an older brick building. And we're also going to have a little bit of fun using stencil. And I'm going to show you how to create a realistic old faded ghost sign for our brick building using stencil and acrylic paint. So for this how-to, we'll be using a structure that I'm currently building for my Fort Smith, Arkansas layout. Now the structure won't be an exact replica of the Arkansas Coffin Company, but it'll be a pretty good representation. Now the company itself was a Missouri Pacific customer, and it actually got its start in the early part of the 20th century, later became Arkansas Casket Company, but the lettering was never changed on the outside of the building. And the company actually survived up until the late 1980s and is currently used as a furniture storage warehouse. So for this project, I'm using a wooden kit from a Canadian company called ITLA Scale Models. And I'll tell you, I want to give a shout out to these folks. This is the third kit I've put together from this company. I'm really liking the products they have been putting out. And I tell you, just to give you an idea of how they go above and beyond, like the 3-in-1 building kit, you don't get like a couple of pages of black and white instructions. You get a color booklet that has color photos in there and tips as far as painting and weathering. And these kits are really straightforward, really easy to put together. So I've got their web address out there, so if you get a chance, just go out and take a look at what they have. I think you'll like it. Now, as you know, the base coat of brick can come in, many different colors. Now, for this project, the look that I was going for, the base color for the brick parts I used is called Satin Brick, and it's made by Krylon Paints. And I've used, Krylon paints on different projects, and I really like them. The paint goes on very smooth, and the drying time is, pretty fast. I would say probably a couple hours, you're ready to move on to other parts of the project. So here you see a section where I've got the Krylon paint on there and it's dried. And there's some tape at the bottom there, and that's actually covering a natural stone foundation. It's going to be another color. And really the key into getting good results, whether you're using spray paint or an airbrush, is just keep moving. You want to start on either side of the object that you're painting, and you just want to keep going in a steady pace. You don't want to hold the airbrush or can paint in an area too long, because what can happen is all of a sudden that area you're painting, the paint starts building up, it starts running, and it looks horrible. And it's a lot easier to go back and put a second coat versus trying to clean up a mess that you've created. So again, even if you see an area doesn't get good coverage, that's okay. Let it dry, come back and do it later, and the results will really be nice for you. Okay, so my next step, I'm going to get into some hand painting and detailing. Now these are all acrylic paints. The antique white you see there, that's going to be a base color for my building foundation. Now the other 4 colors are in the red family. I have a maroon color there, it's a wine color. I have a color called red leather from Vallejo Paints. And the reason I have these colors, what they're going to be used for, is because I'm modeling an older brick building. On older brick, unless it's been painted, the shades tend to differ from here to there. So if you look at an old brick building, some of the brick might be lighter than other colors, others might be a little bit darker. So to get that effect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomly paint individual brick using these colors. So for example, I might take that Master Touch and I might, put that on some individual bricks. Then I might take the red leather color and put on some others. And so not all the bricks will be painted, just random bricks here and there. And I will admit, this has got to be in the top 10 tedious task from hell list. But I promise you, especially if you're going for a realistic looking older brick building, it is worth the time and effort to do this. You're going to be really pleased with the final results. So the brush I'm going to use to paint my brick needs to be a very, very fine tipped brush. And so this package of brushes I got off of Amazon, I think maybe $10 or $12. And the brand's not important. What you want to make sure of is the brush is designed for the type of paint that you're going to use, be it acrylic or oils or enamels. It needs to be a round brush, and the tip size needs to be at least a 000 brush, which is a very fine tip point brush. So when painting individual brick, just take it slow, take breaks. Certainly don't want to try to do the entire structure at one time. A pair of optivisors I found are really good for this work. Like a lot of modelers, my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, and I can use the optivisors for all kinds of other projects too. And then as far as paint, I will start out with one color and I'll finish everything I need to with that color before going to the next color, because that way you don't have paint sitting on your palette, drying out. And also too, if you get paint between the bricks, that's okay, because when you put the mortar down, it's going to disappear. So no worries there. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right. So here's another image of a section where the paint's already dried. It gives you an idea too of, when I say you're randomly painting brick, what that looks like here. So again, it's a brick here and there. You also see on the natural stone foundation there, I've got my base coat down of that antique white. So now we're off to the next step, which is adding the mortar. So if I need brick mortar on my structures, my go-to product is Robert's Brick Mortar Formula, and you can pick this up at a lot of the hobby shops out there online. And I've tried other techniques and products and things in the past, and the results are just not as good as what I get when using the Robert's Brick Mortar Formula. But I'm always interested in what some of the other hobbyists are doing out there. So if you have your product or technique for brick mortar for your structures, be sure to put those down in the comments section. I'd like to see what you're doing out there. So the application of the Robert's Brick Mortar is really easy. Like I'm using here is just a kid's art brush. You can buy these, packs of 20 or 30 at Walmart or Amazon or Hobby Store or whatever for a few bucks. And basically all you're doing is just dipping in that formula, and you're just getting a good coat on your structure, and you're going to let it dry, and that's it. So here's an image of my wall after I finished applying the product. So I'll let this dry, at least an hour before I go back and do the next step. So after the product's dried, the next step is wiping off that excess. So what I'm going to do is take a very thick paper towel. I use the Vivos. It needs to be something, pretty thick. And I'm going to dip it in the water, and I'm going to wring it out real good, because you want it damp. You don't want it wet. So my technique is I'll take the damp paper towel and I'll wipe a small section, and then use another section of the paper towel that hasn't been used yet, wipe another small section. And then once the towel is pretty well been used, then I'll just toss it aside and grab another paper towel. But you don't want to reuse the same paper towel or dip it in the water again. So here's a close-up of our section after I've done a couple of wipe downs to get that excess mortar off there. And the cool thing with the Robert's Brick Mortar product is, depending on the look that you're going for, you can leave a little bit more on there. Like say if I was going for a more chalky appearance, I would have done that. Maybe one wipe down would have been sufficient. You can apply more after it's dried. So again, you have a lot of options there. Now, if I was going for a look of a newer building, I'd probably leave it like this. But since the building I'm modeling has been standing for quite some time, there's a few more steps I want to do to kind of get that, been around for a few years look. So for the next step, I'm going to give my sections a really good coating of two weathering powders. One is called Ash, and the other is going to be a grimy gray. So using that kid's artist brush, using the ash color, I'm just going to put it all over the structure here. I'm going to give it a good coat, going to rub it in there really, really good. Now the other color that I'm going to use, grimy gray, I want to use this just a little bit more sparingly. So I'm going to get a little bit of grimy gray on there. You see here I'm going to kind of get a lot of it off that brush, and then I'm also going to apply it here. Okay, so now you see your section, and I've got a good coat of that weathering powder on there. So now we're ready for a next step. So the next step, using a clean and damp paper towel, I'm going to wipe down that section. And that's going to leave you random areas of various shades, and that's exactly the look that I'm going for here. So the next step, I'm going to apply a Vallejo model wash called European Dust. Okay, so taking another one of those kids artist brush, I'm just going to dip it in a Vallejo wash here. And I'm going to apply it to small sections at a time because we don't want this to dry before we do our next step. So with each area that you're applying that weathering solution, what you want to do is go back and wipe it down with a damp paper towel and then continue on with another section. Okay, so here we see what our almost finished section looks like. The brick part is pretty well finished. Still a couple more steps to go that I'm going to show you. Now, you see here how everything comes together. And, you know, the random shading and the colors and just overall, you know, the look of just a nice older brick building. So now I need to go back and give my building foundation a little bit more attention. Now I've got a base color of antique white, but I need to go back and do another step to make it look more realistic and also to kind of bring it out more. So using Vallejo Model Wash, a color called dark gray, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna apply that wash in between the stone. So using the same type of brush that I used when I painted the brick, I'm just gonna apply some of that Vallejo wash in between the stones here along those lines. And if you get some of the wash in the brick, that's okay. It's actually gonna help us on our next step. And what the shading does is it's going to add depth to this area and it's gonna add to the realism. So after applying the wash in a small area of that foundation, what I'm gonna do is go back with a dry paper towel, and you're seeing here I'm just wiping that area down. And what that's gonna do is it's going to kind of smear out some of that wash it got on that stone, and it's gonna give the area sort of like an old grungy look. Now the painting and weathering of my wall sections is done, but given once the structure is finished it's going to be a representation of the Arkansas Coffin Company, I need to add that ghost sign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use stencil, acrylic paint, and a wash to get that old ghost sign effect. So the first thing I've got to do is actually make sure that the ghost sign is going to fit on the building in the area that I want it. So taking a cardboard file folder and the stencil and a sharpened pencil, what I'm going to do is create a cardboard version of the sign. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm taking notes on the distance between the letters and the distance between the words. And this way, if it looks like it's going to be a good fit, I have those measurements to go by when I'm actually applying the stencil to the building itself. Okay, so taking a metal ruler as a straight guide, I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and I'm going to cut out the sign and then place it in the building and see if it fits. Okay, well it looks like the sign's going to be a good fit and I'll be able to put it on the section of the building where I want it. And now if it hadn't fit, of course I did have the option of going with a smaller stencil, or I could have just chosen a different area to see if it would work. Okay, so the first thing I've got to do is put that black background down for my sign. Now, remember the sign is ghost signs, including the background, so it's not going to be a solid black color anymore. So the first thing to do to get that effect is to put full strength that dark gray of Vallejo wash, same stuff I used in some of the earlier steps. And so I've got the green painter's tape there, the frog tape, and that kind of is a guide on where that section starts. And then I'm using the window positions of the building to guide me as far as the top and bottom of that section. So what I'll do is I'll apply this in small sections at a time. And the reason for that is we don't want this to dry before we do our next step. So the next step is I want to start fading that area I put that black wash. And so what I'm doing here is I'm taking a damp paper towel and I'm just rubbing that area down. You don't have to get all of it off. Matter of fact, you do want to leave some of it, all right? So you also notice too, I'm rubbing horizontally because I don't want any of that wash to be smeared below or above where that background will be. Okay, so now you see an image of that black background after I've completed putting that wash down and wiping it down with a damp paper cloth. And again, you're going to get more of a fade, you know, in the final steps, like when the dull coat and everything is put down. And you can always go back and add more, take more off if you need to, depending on the look that you're trying to get. All right, so we are ready to stencil. And one thing I wanted to show you, and the reason I picked out the stencil, is you see it's a thick plastic material, so it stays pretty flat, but it's also transparent. And that's really helpful because you can see what's underneath, and that's going to help me as I judge where that lettering needs to go. So when you're picking out a stencil, you want a thick material. You don't want anything kind of flimsy, going to flop around, but you also want something transparent. It's going to really help. Okay, so when applying the stencil, you see I have that green frog tape there. Even though I have the brick and I can see where that black ends, this is still going to help me keep that lettering straight. And you notice here as I'm lining up the lettering, okay? And this is the same thing I use as for measuring the distance on the cardboard sign. I'm going to take a little piece of wood there, and that's the distance that I have marked that's between the lettering. And that's going to help me, along with the notes that I took when I was creating a cardboard sign, that's going to help me know exactly where that lettering needs to go, and it's going to help keep it straight. Now I'm using just a thick white acrylic paint here. This is just Apple Barrel brand. And you notice when I'm applying it, I'm not like brushing it back and forth. What I'm doing is I'm stabbing it. And this is going to kind of help with that faded effect, because what it's going to do is it's going to put paint in some sections, it's going to leave other sections without paint. And then I'm also going to take a paper towel, a dry paper towel, and I'm going to blot that paint. Again, that's going to remove some of that paint. Again, trying to get that faded ghost sign look. All right, so to get the correct distance between the words, to double check that distance, I've got the measurements written down, but I'm using the same piece of wood that I used when I created that cardboard sign. So it's just sort of double checking myself here. Same technique as I used when I was double checking the distance between the actual letters. So to get that final faded look, what I did is I just used an eraser and a number 2 pencil, just a soft pink eraser, and I just rubbed down the areas of the lettering and the black background I wanted to fade out a little bit more. And I really thought I'd actually got video showing me doing this step, but I didn't, unfortunately. But it's really easy. You're just taking that pencil and you're just rubbing it along the area that you want to fade out. And the more fade you want, the longer you rub. Now, one thing you do want to be aware of is when using this technique is that eraser disintegrates pretty quickly. So just be aware because you want to stop using the eraser before all you're left with is metal, because then what happens is you start scratching your structure up, and you don't want that. Okay, so we see the final results, at least the final results as far as painting, weathering the walls, and adding that ghost sign in. You see I've still got a little ways to go in finishing the structure itself. And I tell you see how that, the work, sometimes, tedious work pays off. We've got this really nice older brick structure. It's going to look great on the layout. And again, you have a lot of options there when doing your own building. My advice there is really just go, buy a real world example, and you'll do fine. And that's just like anything in model railroading. That's the best way to get realistic results, is to go by what's out there in the real world. Now, I've got other how-to videos out there, and I've also do layout updates. So if you're not a subscriber, I do invite you to subscribe to the channel. And if you have techniques that you want to share as far as weathering and brickwork, or just really any type of model railroading work, if you have any comments and questions, I invite you to put them down in that comment section there. I'd really like to hear from you. So until next time, wishing everyone happy model railroading and highball.